Have you ever waited for someone who never came? Not because they couldn't, but because they simply chose not to. I have, and I was 67 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a drainage tube in my side, when I finally understood that some people will only love you as long as loving you costs them nothing. My name is not important. What I'm about to tell you is, I spent 41 years in a house on Renfrew Street in Winnipeg, a red brick house with a white porch that my late husband Terence built with his own hands the summer before our daughter Lydia was born. We weren't wealthy people. Terence drove a city transit bus. I worked part-time at a fabric shop on Portage Avenue until Lydia came along, and then I stayed home. We didn't have much, but we had enough food, enough warmth, enough love that the house never felt small. Terence passed in 2019, heart failure. He was there one Tuesday morning and gone by Thursday afternoon. And I spent the better part of a year not knowing what to do with the silence he left behind. Lydia was 41 when her father died. She lived 40 minutes away in a newer suburb called Bridgewater. One of those neighborhoods where every house looks like every other house and the lawns are so perfect they look painted. She had a husband, my son-in-law Desmond Fawcett, and 2 boys, Oliver and Max, 10 and 7 at the time. I loved those boys so much it hurt. After Terence died, Lydia called every Sunday. Every single Sunday without fail around noon. I looked forward to those calls the way I used to look forward to Terence coming through the door at the end of his shift. That particular kind of relief, knowing someone was thinking of you. But things change. They always do. Desmond had started a contracting business sometime around 2020, and it had done well. Better than I expected, honestly, because Desmond was never a man I'd have called ambitious. He was pleasant enough when I first met him, a little quiet, the kind of man who laughed at other people's jokes but never quite made any of his own. Lydia loved him, and that was enough for me. I didn't need to love him. I just needed to trust that he was good to my daughter. The Sunday calls started getting shorter, sometime in the spring of 2021. I noticed but didn't say anything. Then they started getting less frequent. By autumn they were coming maybe twice a month. By the following winter, I was the one calling her. I told myself it was the business, that she was busy with the boys, with the house, with everything that comes with a life that's full. I made excuses for her the way mothers do. The way we've always done, quietly, so no one sees us doing it. The trouble with my gallbladder started in late 2022. It had been giving me problems for years. A slow, gnawing ache that I'd learned to manage with diet and stubbornness, the way older women manage most things. But in February of 2023, it stopped being something I could manage. I was at the kitchen table one morning, trying to eat a piece of toast, and the pain that hit me was so sudden and so absolute that I knocked the chair back and ended up on the floor without quite knowing how I got there. The surgery was scheduled for the 14th of March. I called Lydia the moment I had the date. It was a Thursday evening, around 7, and she answered on the 3rd ring, which already felt like a minor victory. I told her what the doctor had said. I told her it was laparoscopic, minimally invasive, that they expected to keep me one night and send me home. I told her I wasn't panicking, and that was true, mostly, but that I would really like it if she could be there. She said of course, she said it without hesitation. She said, "Mom, obviously, yes, I'll be there." I went to sleep that night feeling lighter than I had in months. The 14th arrived. I packed a small overnight bag, the same brown canvas bag I'd used for hospital visits since my appendix came out in 1994, and I took a cab to the Health Sciences Center because Lydia had texted that morning saying she'd meet me there. She'd go directly to the hospital, she said. Desmond had a site meeting, but it would be quick. She'd be there by 10. I checked in at the admissions desk at 9:15. The woman behind the counter was efficient and kind and asked me twice if I had someone coming. I said yes. My daughter. I was brought to a pre-op room at 9:40. A young nurse came in to start my IV and go over the consent forms. Her name badge said Gretchen Muller. She had close-cropped natural hair and small gold earrings, and she moved with a kind of quiet efficiency that I've always found deeply reassuring in medical people. She asked me the standard questions, checked my blood pressure, wrote things down. Then she looked up and said, "Is your family on their way?" "My daughter," I said. "She should be here soon." Gretchen smiled. Good. Is there anything you need while you wait? I said no, I was fine. At 10:15 I texted Lydia. Just checking in, they're getting me prepped. Are you close? She responded 11 minutes later, running a bit behind. Traffic on the perimeter. Be there soon. I put my phone on the bedside table and looked at the ceiling tiles. And reminded myself that traffic on the perimeter highway was genuinely unpredictable. Especially in March when the ice was breaking and the construction was starting. I was not going to be one of those mothers who catastrophizes. I was not going to be a burden. At 11, Gretchen came back to tell me they were ready for me. Did your daughter make it? She asked. And she asked it the way you ask something when you already suspect the answer. I looked at my phone. No new messages. She's on her way, I said. Gretchen looked at me for a moment. Just a moment. And then she said, would you like me to try reaching her for you? Sometimes it helps to have someone call. I said no. I said I was fine. And then I was wheeled down the corridor and through the swinging doors. And the last thing I thought, before the anesthetic took me, was that Lydia had promised she would be there. I woke up in the recovery room at 1:17 in the afternoon. According to the clock on the wall, my mouth was dry and my side ached, and the first thing I did was turn my head to look for her. There was no one in the chair beside my bed. A different nurse was there, older, with silver hair pulled back and a manner that was professionally warm without being saccharine. Her name was Patricia Osi. She saw my eyes open and came straight over. There you are, she said. You did. Just fine. Everything went well. Is my daughter here? I asked, and my voice came out strange and thin, the way voices do after anesthesia. Patricia looked at the chair. Then she looked back at me. I'll check the waiting area, she said. She was back in 4 minutes. I know because I watched that clock. I didn't see anyone, she said gently. Is there a number I can try? I gave her Lydia's number. Patricia stepped out, and I lay there listening to the machines and the distant sounds of the ward. And I thought about the 14th of March, 1987. The day I brought Lydia home from this same hospital. She was born here, in fact, and how I had sat in the back of Terrence's Chevrolet with her wrapped in a yellow blanket, and I had felt so sure, so absolutely certain, that I would never let anything hurt her. Patricia came back. I left a message, she said. I'm sure she'll be here soon, she said it kindly. She didn't say it convincingly. Lydia did not come that afternoon. She texted at 3:42. So sorry, Mom. Max had a thing at school. I'm so sorry, how are you feeling? Call me when you're up to it, Max had a thing at school. I stared at those words for a long time. I thought about what kind of thing at school could not been handled by Desmond, or by a neighbor, or by any one of the 800 arrangements that parents make every single day when something unexpected comes up. I thought about the fact that my daughter had known for 3 weeks that I was having surgery on this day. I thought about the fact that I was 67 years old, and I had been alone when I went under, and alone when I came out, and the chair beside my bed had been empty the entire time. I didn't call her. I put the phone face down on the blanket and closed my eyes. Patricia came back at 4. She had a cup of weak tea and a small pack of crackers, and she pulled the chair close and sat down and said, I'm off in an hour, but I wanted to check on you before I go. She paused. Did your daughter call? She texted, I said. Patricia nodded. She didn't push. We sat quietly for a moment, and then she asked me about my house on Renfrew Street. She'd noticed the address on my file, and said she used to cut through that neighborhood on her walks. And I told her about Terrence building the porch, and she told me about her own husband, who had tried to build a deck the previous summer with results that she described with such gentle, dry humor that I actually laughed, which hurt my side but felt like medicine anyway. She stayed an extra 20 minutes past her shift end. I know because she mentioned it when she got up to leave, not to make me feel guilty, just matter-of-factly, the way you'd mention the time to a friend. I have to catch my bus, she said. But you're going to be fine. You're tougher than you think. I was discharged the following afternoon. A volunteer from the hospital helped me into a cab because there was no one else. Lydia had offered, finally, to come that evening, once the boys were in bed. I had told her not to bother. The weeks after surgery were harder than I'd expected. Not because of the physical recovery. That went reasonably well, all things considered. But because of the silence. The particular quality of silence in a house where someone used to live and doesn't anymore. Where there are 2 coffee mugs in the cupboard. And you only ever use one. Lydia called the Sunday after I got home. She was apologetic in the way that people are apologetic, but also feel somewhere underneath, that they had their reasons, and that those reasons ought to count for something. She said Max's presentation had been rescheduled last minute, and that Desmond had been unreachable and that she had really tried, to make it work. I listened. I said, "I know, sweetheart." I said it because I didn't have the energy for the alternative, but something had shifted in me. Something quiet and final, the way ice shifts in late March. You don't always hear it go, but one morning you look out and the river is moving again. I started thinking about the will. Terrence and I had last updated it in 2017. Everything had gone to Lydia. The house, the savings, the small RRSP I'd managed to keep funded. It had made sense at the time. She was our only child. Who else was there? But I sat in my kitchen on Renfrew Street in the weeks after my surgery, drinking tea alone and watching the sparrows on the back fence. And I thought about who had actually sat with me in that recovery room. I thought about Patricia Osei, who had stayed past her shift, who had made me laugh even though it hurt, who had treated me not like a patient number, but like a person with a porch and a history and a husband who was gone. I started thinking about what loyalty actually looks like. Not loyalty that costs nothing. Loyalty that requires something of you. Your time, your energy, the hour after your shift when you could be anywhere else. I made an appointment with my lawyer, a woman named Gail Sutherland, who had handled Terrence's estate and who I trusted completely. I sat in her office on a bright April morning and I told her everything. The surgery, the empty chair, the text about Max's thing at school, the volunteer who had helped me into the cab. Gail listened the way good lawyers listen, without interruption, without visible reaction, taking her notes. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I told her. I wasn't reckless about it. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this can sound. Like spite, like punishment, like a woman acting out of hurt feelings. It wasn't that, or it wasn't only that. I had thought about it for weeks, clearly and carefully, in the particular way you think when you've recently been reminded that you are not going to live forever and that the time remaining ought to count for something. I set aside a protected education trust for Oliver and Max, enough to cover university, fully protected, so that neither Lydia nor Desmond could touch it until the boys were 19. I want to say that loudly, because I know people will ask. I did not forget my grandsons. I love those boys. What happened between me and their mother was not their fault, and they would not be the ones to pay for it. But the house, Terrence's house, the red brick house with the white porch on Renfrew Street, and the remainder of my savings, I redirected. Not to Lydia. I found Patricia Osei through the hospital's staff directory. It took a few phone calls and a letter explaining who I was, and I was prepared for her not to respond. When she did call back, she sounded genuinely uncertain. The kind of uncertain that isn't false modesty, but actual confusion. She had no idea why I would be reaching out. We met for coffee at a Tim Hortons near the hospital. She came in still wearing her coat, a bit windswept, and she looked at me with the same calm directness I'd remembered from the recovery room. I told her what I was doing. I told her why. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I was just doing my job." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it different." She told me she had a daughter in Saskatoon and a mortgage she was behind on, and that she'd been thinking about going back to school to become a nurse practitioner, but the cost kept stopping her. She told me all of this reluctantly, only because I asked directly, and only after she'd spent several minutes trying to talk me out of the whole thing. I told her I'd made up my mind. Gail Sutherland drew up the new documents. I signed them on a Thursday in late April, sitting at Gail's desk, with the window open, and the smell of the city coming in. Exhaust and coffee, and the particular damp earth smell that Winnipeg has in spring, like the whole ground is waking up after a long sleep. I sat there and I signed my name, and I felt, for the first time since March, like I was breathing properly. I did call Lydia. I want to be honest about this. Part of me almost didn't. Part of me thought about simply letting her find out later, the way these things get found out, through the machinery of lawyers and estates. But that would have been cowardice dressed up as privacy. I'm 67 years old. I've lived too long for that. I called her on a Sunday, her day, the day she'd once reliably called me. And when she answered, I said, "Lydia, I need to talk to you about something important. And I need you to just listen until I'm finished." She listened. I'll give her that. She didn't interrupt. I told her about the surgery, not just the facts she knew, but the parts she hadn't been there for. The clock on the recovery room wall, the empty chair, the volunteer who put me in the cab. I told her about sitting in my kitchen afterward, thinking about Terrence, thinking about what it means to actually show up for someone. And then I told her what I'd done. The silence that followed was very long. "You gave our house to a nurse," she said finally. Her voice was flat, the way voices go flat when the thing being said is too large to fit into any other register. "I gave it to someone who was there," I said, "and I set up trusts for Oliver and Max. They're taken care of." "Mom!" I'm not finished. I surprised myself with how steady I sounded. "I'm not punishing you, Lydia. I want you to understand that. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing it because I spent a long time believing that family means the people whose names match yours on a legal document. And then I lay in a hospital room for 2 days, and the only person who stayed was someone I'd never met before, and I had to ask myself what I was actually valuing." She cried. I knew she would, and I let her, as I sat with it, and I didn't try to fix it or soften it because some things shouldn't be softened. "I love you," I told her when she'd quieted. "I love you in a way that has nothing to do with money or houses, or what gets written in a will. That hasn't changed. But I needed you in March, and you didn't come. And I've had to make peace with what that means." She called back twice that week. She came to the house the following Saturday for the first time in months, just her, without the boys, without Desmond. And she sat at my kitchen table and we talked for 3 hours. Really talked. The way we hadn't talked in years. Some of it was hard. Some of it was things I hadn't known she was carrying. About Desmond, about the business, about feeling pulled in directions that left her hollow. I listened. I tried to. I don't know what will happen between us. I don't know if what broke in March can be fully repaired or whether it will just be something we carry, the way you carry old injuries. Manageable, most of the time, but always there when the weather changes. What I know is that I'm still here, in this house on Renfrew Street, with Terrence's white porch. And that I've stopped pretending that love means never drawing a line. Patricia Osei is going back to school in September. She sent me a card last month. A plain card. The kind you buy at the drugstore. And inside, she'd written, "I still think you could have changed your mind. But I promise I won't waste it. I keep that card on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where I can see it when I'm washing up. Every morning. Some people come into your life exactly when you need them to, and they stay just long enough to remind you what you're worth. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you get the chance to tell them that you noticed. I noticed, Patricia. I'm glad you were there.